Welcome to Sherlock Monthly. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we are going on a monthly biblioventure through the stories of Sherlock Holmes. And today's episode is on the adventure of the three students. And we have our three students here. You two and myself. Returning is one of our regular co-hosts from back in Sherlock Mondays, Curtis Armstrong. Hi, Curtis.
Hello, how are you?
I'm great, thank you. And especially Curtis, as this is a treat for you as well as me. We're joined by the renowned bibliophile and author, Rebecca Romney. Hey, welcome.
Hello.
I'm so happy to have you. Here's my Jane Austen's bookshelf all ready to plug for people too. It's an absolutely fantastic book. Talk about that in a second. Everyone, for 30 weeks in 2023 to 24, we deduced, deciphered, dissected Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes adventures in a kind of conversational annotation for our weekly Biblioventures series, that was called Sherlock Mondays. You can see all those episodes on the Rosenbach's YouTube channel. And now we're continuing in a monthly series. Every month, a distinguished Sherlockian or two joins me to discuss one of the stories in the order they were first published. And a reminder, if you're watching live right now, hello and thank you. Let me make sure I can see my chat here. Oh, look, you're all there. That's so wonderful. So many great Sherlockians join us. Beth and Bob and Madeline and Margie and all the rest of you who have been in this crowd for so long. Thank you for joining us. You guys know the chat is for you, the live chat. Enjoy, have fun, talk the whole time that we're talking. It's not distracting to us at all. Have your conversations, enjoy. And if you're watching the recording, if you'd like to leave a comment or ask a question in the comments field, I will answer those in due time when I see them. And I would ask everyone if you would please consider making a donation to the Rosenbach Museum and Library or by becoming a member. You can do this at our website, rosenbach.org. Your support helps us create programs like this and also care for our collections. And Sherlock Monthly is also brought to you by the generous support of Lisa Washington, who has sponsored both the Mondays and now the monthly series. And I'm very grateful that she has done that. Thank you, Lisa. Let us continue. I want to introduce my co-hosts for today. Curtis Armstrong is an actor who began his life in the organized Sherlockian world when he joined the trifling Monographs, a science society for students. Makes this a good one for you to do today. Founded by the late Susan Rice in the late 60s. His first paper was published in the Baker Street Journal shortly before his induction in the Baker Street Irregulars in 2006. He has delivered numerous papers since at the BSI annual birthday weekend in New York City, 221B Con, and many others. Recently, he was featured in both seasons of the Audible dramatic series Moriarty. And welcome back, Curtis. I'm so happy to have you here again.
Thank you, Ed.
Rebecca Romney is a rare book deal. Oh, and you can see Curtis's episodes on Sherlock Mondays back on that channel, on our YouTube channel too. He's in lots of great episodes. So feel free to watch those for more Curtis. Rebecca Romney is a rare book dealer who came to the Sherlockian circles by way of handling first editions of Arthur Conan Doyle's works. She is a member of the Baker Street Irregulars, the Sons of the Copper Beeches, yay, and the Five Orange Pips. She has presented Sherlockian papers at the BSI's annual dinner, University of Minnesota, numerous science societies. Most recently, she was the editor of the Baker Street Journal's 2024 Christmas annual, Gather Round the Sundial, A Night with the Five Orange Pips. And she is the author of the excellent new non-Sherlockian book, but nevertheless one you should read, Jane Austen's Bookshelf. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi. I mean, it technically does have some Sherlockian content.
I was going to add that.
So if you need an excuse, it's there right in the first chapter. I use a very Sherlockian perspective that I established in the beginning, because you can't help but look at everything from a Sherlockian perspective.
Is that the way it goes with you guys? It's like no matter what you do, there's some kind of Sherlock involved?
Pretty much.
It's not hard to find an excuse. It's not even the kind of Steve Rothman game of figuring out a way to mention Christopher Morley. It is just, once you just have that kind of mindset, it's organic, I think.
I was reading a vampire novel. That's a little old now, called The Quick, a vampire novel by Lauren Owen. And sure enough, two of the characters are reading Sherlock Holmes in like the very last chapter of the book. So to each other. So he
It is
pops up.
amazing how it crops up everywhere. And there are even places I have like a paper waiting in my head about Georgette Hare using Sherlock Holmes as the model for some of her heroes. I think that like the way he suffuses everything, if you're looking for it, you will find it.
Interesting. That's fascinating. Yes, write that paper. Um, we at the Rosenbach too. This has been wonderful having this series and helping us kind of grow our collection. And I think I did this on the last episode, but I'll do it again here because we have the Type Punch Matrix connection, Rebecca's book selling company, and we have a new Lippincott's original Sign of Four in our collections now, thanks to this copy that Rebecca had found. And where is my thing here to share it? There we go. You'd think I'd be quick at this, but like once a month I get slow again. There it is. And I put it next to our first edition hardcover of Sign of Four. So thank you, Rebecca, for this one. And here it is, shelved. Now, it's not a huge shelf of Conan Doyle, but it's a significant shelf of Conan Doyle with the two Sign of Fours, Christopher Morley's Sherlock Holmes and Watson book, The Return and the First Memoirs, Hound of the Baskervilles. This was acquired not that long ago, The Great Shadow, and this in this white case here is the manuscript for The Empty House. So thank you, Rebecca, for finding that. And we got to see it at the New York Antiquarian Book Fair. And then subsequently, it arrived.
Yeah, no, that your first edition in book form is a beautiful copy. It's very fresh.
Yeah, it is. It's nice to have too. All righty. Well, before we start the story, Claire Danes, who watches us from New Zealand, has become our Sherlockian poet in residence, and she writes a little rhyme for every story. And here's hers for 3 students. Rub-a-dub-dub, a school in hubbub. Suspicions on students 3. The athlete, the loller, the Indian scholar. Who could the guilty one be? There we go. With no spoiler in it.
That's up the stakes very well.
Yes. Thank you, Claire, for that. And this episode, everyone, will be the last in this series so far until September. So I'm going to take 2 months off to sweat in the summer and read up and prepare some notes. And we will return in September 2025 for the next run of Sherlock's stories, starting with the adventure of the Golden Pince-Nez. You know, I'm sure like everyone for years as a child, it was Pince-Nez. And then I didn't know that until well into adulthood. I've actually worked out the entire run of the canon that we can do for Sherlock Monthly. And even with my couple months in the summers off, it'll still be 3 years I'll be doing this. So I hope some of you will stick around for 3 more years. It's been 2 already. We'll finish in spring 2028, and we'll have covered every Sherlock Holmes story as published in chronological order. So let's hope I last.
You can do it. I believe in you.
Where will the beard be then?
You can measure it by beard length.
That's it. All righty. 3 students published in actually 2 different times. It usually when we're doing these, it's published in the Strand for this run and the Collier's Weekly at the same time. But this time the Strand in England published 3 students in June, and Collier's didn't publish until September. They wanted to take the summer off, but really it seems that they wanted to save the final 4 stories in this series so they could finish in December for their Christmas issue, because that's the biggest selling issue, the one you want a big name for anyway. And the Strand was having no parts of that. They were going to continue to publish as you know, as they were written. And the manuscript for this is actually at the Houghton Library, and I have the first, and it's really nice. I don't have a link for it. If you look up Harvard Houghton Library, they actually make this manuscript available to you to see online.
It's one of the oldest manuscripts actually in an institution. It's been there for about 100 years now. It's very, very long time, in fact.
Yeah, it came across this. It came as part of this collection donated to them by Norton Perkins, I think his name was. Yeah, the Norton Perkins Library in 1925. So yeah, 100 years.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, 100 years this year. And this is the first page of it. And I was paging through the whole thing on their site. It's exceptionally clean. There's very few edits on this one. They usually Doyle, I mean, his handwriting and his manuscripts are always immaculate and anybody could read them. But he goes through and he makes a few corrections, but fewer than usual in this one. And on the top in the corner here, you can see it says in pencil, same as usual. And that was almost certainly the typist, or a note for no, written by the typist, that Doyle had given it to him, because I think this handwriting matches up with the ones on the others that I've seen that the typist has written. On our empty house, it says 3 copies. Something Morley Hotel was where they were going to meet. He was going to give him the 3 copies that he typed up for him. And but this is what it is, same as usual. It means he was going to type 3 copies for Doyle. One he would keep, one would go to the Strand, and one would be shipped off to America for this time to be published in Collier's. And
so it wasn't a comment on the quality of the story.
yeah, same as usual.
It does look like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, that was the first thing I thought.
Just another Sherlockian mystery, whatever.
Well, actually, it's a funny thing, because I was reading it this time for this show, and I don't know why I never noticed that there are only 3 Sherlock Holmes stories that take place at schools, and they're all in the second half of The Return of Sherlock Holmes. It's Missing Three Quarter, 3 Students, and Priory School are all in this one chunk, divided between, there are a couple in between, but he seemed to have students on his mind at this point in his life.
Yeah, running theme perhaps in those last bits that he was.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine what what it was, but I went back and looked all through the other short story collections. He never did another school-based stories. So
Maybe the new setting was a way to try to encourage new ideas, since coming up with the ideas at this point was one of the tricky things for him.
that's right. Yeah, yeah.
We're speculating live. That's what you do, right?
Either way, that's what we do. The Strand published this in their usual format, and here's the cover of that issue, where Sherlock makes the top billing up here, and on the other side, Sarah Bernhardt's memoirs have been continuing to be published in the Strand. So that was a big draw for people. And as usual, for many of the stories now, I think only one in this series, Charles Augustus Milverton, I think, doesn't start with a lead illustration, and this one does as well. And this is the first story in the issue too. So the Strand is leading off with Sherlock Holmes as the first story in the issue. And this is a scene later, but at least it's not spoilery, as some of them can be sometimes, and that Doyle didn't like when they were spoilery. But and oddly, we'll talk about this later. The only really dramatic scene in this story, so it's hard to find scenes that would really make good illustrations. So,
he really tested the illustrators on this one.
yeah. So, the Colliers, which doesn't come out till later in the year. I'm going to share the JPEGs of that because they're clearer. Here's the Collier's cover with Frederick Dorr Steele illustrations, and a little unusual. I mean, it's the books on the table. This is him, I guess, pointing out something. What's that there? Footprint on the floor or something. But what I never noticed of this is that the shadow doesn't match. Has this been talked about before? The shadow looks like Paget's Sherlock. And this is modeled after William Gillette here. And I can't help but think that this is on purpose by Dorr Steele, that it's his little nod to Sidney Paget, because it really is clearly Paget's Holmes, but the hair is entirely different.
Yeah.
And I had not known that he would have done that. So, but that's what it looks like to me. So, but I don't know. Paget hadn't died by this time, right? He died
1905, I believe, is when he died, right?
So it's the next year that
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
I might again spitballing,
Because he doesn't survive to the next series for Sherlock, does he? Does he do one more? No, he finishes this series and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The pipe doesn't even look the same. The pipe looks sort of like a straight pipe as opposed to a curved one.
Yeah.
Oh, 1908. Sorry, just double checked. Sidney Paget died in 1908.
But it does look like Paget.
Yeah. It'd be nice if it was that, like a little nod to him. I love that idea. And as usual, there's a title illustration up here they put up top and decorates it. Some of them, there have been skulls and all kinds of deadly things around them. Here it's like a little student scene.
I think, for the record, that Frederick Dorr Steele did very well by a story that doesn't have a lot of dramatic scenes. He found drama in his composition, where he had to supply it himself. I think, Paget, you get a little bit more of that elegance, that laid back elegance that is characteristic, which doesn't float very well for this story, doesn't carry itself very well. But for Steele, where he's constantly looking for visual centers, ways to draw the eye and to play with how you see things, I think that he is able to create something that is engaging when in fact, they're just people talking in a room.
I mean, it gives, for the initial eye, he gives this, kind of Gothic school tower here, which gives it a little drama that it wouldn't normally have. And he gives us each of the three students.
Or suspects.
Yes. Doyle Ross. And then here's the other two on the next page. Miles McLaren, looking definitely dissolute here with the cigarette.
Oh, yeah.
And
that's a proto James Dean right there.
Yeah.
And the very upright Gilchrist. Who would suspect Gilchrist? Look at him. And he's even got the pipe, so I'm not going to suspect him. So
looks like a very winning young man.
Yeah. The advertisements are always wonderful to look at in here too. Just all kinds of things. And I like looking at these because this is how our original readers, encountered these, texts. And I like this one over here in the side here. Irish bald wig, 50 cents. Slugger whiskers, 25 cents. Hollow wax nose, 15. Grease palette, deep sunburn, $1 buys the above outfit. So your full disguise right here. I didn't know that Irish have a certain bald thing going on with them.
It's got to be a name for the same hairstyle, I guess. I like how a lot of these advertisements you can see they're actually from all across the country. We've got Toledo, Ohio, Buffalo, Joplin, Missouri. Some of them are big obvious places like Chicago or Boston or New York, but Toledo. I don't
Yeah,
know.
that's where you get it from.
That's right. Toledo is the American costume show.
Kalamazoo, Stoves and
Kalamazoo, yeah.
Ranges. Yeah.
Mhm.
And this one also has, is it on this page? No, I think it's the next page. A Sherlock Holmes ad for a sleepless watchman, which was this keyed safe that like the key would change or something. So you had it's a special key system. So if somebody had a key that it wouldn't always work. It's got some kind of code to go with it or something. And Sherlock Holmes says the prevention of theft is infinitely better and cheaper than its detection and punishment. Well, Sherlock never said that, but he does
But
in this advertisement.
it doesn't sound bad though.
Yeah.
It sounds very Sherlockian.
Well, they also clearly missed an opportunity with that comfy slipper right there and mentioning a perfect place to keep snuff. It was right there.
Yeah.
There. Yep. Your tobacco right in there.
That's right.
They but yeah, and this has even got an advertisement of a picture featuring a Sherlock who doesn't look like any Sherlocks we've ever seen, but he's got a kind of deer stalker perhaps on his head and a long coat. The next issue, and I'll share this now, even though I'll do Golden Pulse-Ney later. The next story, Golden Pince-Nez, in the end of October, for them, they actually use a Gillette picture here, a door steel picture, and it's a little pastiche advertisement
Mm.
with Sherlock and Watson talking about getting the sleepless watchman as a thing that you will remember, the League of Red-Headed Men. Well, I got that a little wrong. No doubt it would have saved our hard-headed friend a lot had he had it all the time. So I find it interesting that we're already seeing, and Sherlock in advertisements seems to go back to, but we're not even sure, 1894, 1895. There you can find advertisements using Sherlock's name and likeness. Um, uh, and there's a Doyle letter from, which is in the Toronto Public Library and their collection. You can see that online too in the Toronto Public Library digital collections. A letter from Doyle in 1916. So, over 10 years after this story, he is writing to Greenhouse Smith, about the editor of the Strand, about a company called the Black Cat. And I don't know what they are. It could be tobacco, because I know there was a Black Cat tobacco that wanted to use his Sherlock Holmes. And he says, "My dear Smith," Doyle wrote, "I think I could sustain my copyright in the words Sherlock Holmes, and I don't think they have been used as an advertisement up to now." Well, they had been many times, and in Collier's 10, 12 years before. "I look on the proposal as a purely business one without any sentiment, and have asked Watt to chat it over with you. At first sight, it looks to me like a matter which should concern the Black Cat and me, whereas you merely handle your own advertisement, but no doubt you will express your view to Watt. The picture would never do, whatever they've proposed as a picture. Holmes must preserve his dignity. He looks about 5 feet high, badly dressed, and with brains or character, and with no brains or character, an actor out of a job." Oh boy, I wish we had that proposal for their advertisement. But it's interesting, because it's still kind of the Wild West for copyright, even though there are laws and it's enforced. But as far as a character and an image, the laws haven't been quite solidified yet of what people can use. But at least this company, Black Cat, had asked Doyle if they could do it, and apparently he said no. So
I do like with that Collier's issue, you can get both the original story and a pastiche in the same issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my collector talking, or my dealer rather. 2 for 1.
All righty. Well, let's move on with the story. It begins. It was in the year 95, so chronologists, you don't have far to go, but that never stopped the chronologists when Watson has given them a year to change it and say, no, it couldn't be then. That's wrong. But it could be misleading because, of course, this is a case where he says, I need to mislead everyone about it. But the first detail about this, it was Sherlock Holmes and myself had spent some weeks in one of our great university towns. So Curtis and Rebecca, the Cambridge Oxford debate has begun.
The controversy? No, I am not wading into the controversy. Are you kidding me?
I have to tell you, the one thing about this story is the whole argument about Oxford or Cambridge was just dull as dishwater to me from the very beginning. I remember being so excited. The first copy I got, which is this copy of Profile by Gaslight, so excited diving into it and reading what all of these great Sherlockian scholars had to say on a range of issues. And then I would get to one of those, there has to be 3 of them in this book, different people expressing their belief. Well, no, obviously it was Oxford, because when you walk in the gate at Oxford, you see this, thing. Who cares? It's actually something I never cared what any of these universities were. It had nothing to do with anything. It was just something to talk about. And frankly, in this story, there's not a lot else to talk about.
So we could go down a rabbit hole for this one. But I find it fascinating is that because what happens is people say that whatever one it is, that must have been the school that Holmes went to, like because he has some familiarity with this place.
Well, if I recall, so Nick Utakin, he was the Oxford champion, right? That Holmes went to Oxford. He's the Oxford man. And Nick Utakin argued that this story took place in Cambridge. And if the Oxford man argues that this took place in Cambridge, then I feel like that's a pretty strong thing in favor of Cambridge, because he would never give that up unless the evidence were uncontrovertible. Nick Utakin is convinced you are good.
Well, one of the things that I always saw talked about in this is the familiarity of Holmes with this place. But he's here because he's doing not obviously he's not been brought here to solve a crime. He's here because he's doing research. It's entirely possible that this fluke thing occurred, but he had been at this college before for the same reason, doing research on one of his papers. I don't think that that's an argument really one way or another.
I also think that this debate about, especially Oxford versus Cambridge, although obviously there are other universities in the UK, I think it has much more to do with how we bring autobiography, we bring ourselves into our reading. I think one of the reasons that for us it's kind of boring, but for others it's very, very close and personal is because it is close and personal. It is people who have gone to Oxford or Cambridge or have very fond memories of either town or either university for one reason or another. It becomes personal, and that's the thing that you get invested in. Whereas, us Americans, we're like, yeah, those are pretty places to visit, but I didn't go there, so I'm
Yeah.
not going to, hoist the flag for Oxford. But
I hoisted the flag for Western Michigan, but no one believes me.
Nobody believes it for that one.
I would read that paper, Curtis.
I don't know. Did they have a long jump pit with that with those little clay pellets? I'm not sure the Western Michigan had that. So did they?
You don't. You're spoiling.
Wait for the paper.
We've all read the story, so I don't worry about spoilers so much. That, to tell you the truth, Rebecca, is because we read the story, so we can mention things that happen along.
We don't have to go chronologically here,
but it does. Well, yeah, we'll just work through the story that way. The it's also for me, it's one of the great university towns, and I love the argument that, well, no one would ever call Oxford a town. Oxford was a city at the time, and Cambridge was still actually considered a town and hadn't actually grown or in that way and or been incorporated as a so it is. There you go. But I'm actually fascinated by it, Curtis, because it seems to, it's one of those little things that's only lightly connected to the story, but then it has all this resonance for people in the biography, as you were mentioning, Rebecca, and the you know, because it's all about Sherlock then, not necessarily about the story. And as also you said, Curtis, it's what else are you going to talk about? So there's not a ton that happens here, but we're going to find some things to talk about, and including Sherlock is it will be Watson says it will be obvious that any details which would help the reader to exactly identify the college or the criminal would be injudicious and offensive. So he is purposefully, you know, telling us that I'm not these aren't their real names. I'm not going to give you clues. You can identify the place. But he also says that Sherlock Holmes was pursuing some laborious researches in early English charters. And in my mind, I just remembered this as, oh, Sherlock's just out searching charters because this is a hobby of his. But then it says researches which led to results so striking that they may be the subject of one of my future narratives. So is Watson saying that Sherlock's researches in the charters was perhaps related to a case that he was on and he needed to find something about them?
or maybe it's like, have you read Daughter of Time by Josephine Tey?
Mm-hmm.
So that is about a detective who is in the recovering in the hospital, and he is like so bored that he decides to solve a historical mystery in the archives from his hospital bed. So maybe that's what Holmes ends up doing is solving some historical mystery that he finds in the when he's studying the early English charters.
And it would be great if it was Who Murdered Richard III or Who Murdered the Princes. So there you go.
What happened to the princes in the Tower?
Yeah. Spoiler.
You haven't yet. By the way,
it was Richard III, everybody. Spoiler. Sorry, I'm no conspiracy.
Highly recommend Daughter of Time, though.
That's a wonderful, wonderful novel.
I think it just was reissued, actually. So
yeah,
another good excuse. Anyway, sorry, Sherlock Holmes.
That's okay. So
are we allowed to mention other detectives?
Oh yeah, other detectives are welcome. I just finished doing Mystery of Edwin Drood and a course for the Rosenbach. And as part of that, I read the D case, which is fascinating because it's I can't remember the two Italian authors' names, but it's all the detectives. They're at a literary conference in like 1980 in Rome. And they're trying to solve the mystery of Edwin Drood. And it's not only scholars, but all the detectives are there as characters as well. So Sherlock is there, and Poirot, and Father Brown, and on down the line. They're all there to solve it as well. And it's a lot of fun to have all those detectives in the same room talking about a Dickens mystery, which is fun. All righty. Hilton Soames comes in, tutor and lecturer at the College of St. Luke's, but that's a ruse. We don't know where he's from. And Watson says, I had always known him to be restless in his manner, but on this occasion he was in uncontrollable agitation. So Watson knows him. And this is part of that. They're in a location here that they know these people. But here it's Watson says he knows him. And I hadn't noticed that before either.
I have to say, I find restlessness a very odd character trait for a classicist. Classicists strike me as the opposite of restless.
Yeah. And Holmes and he comes to Holmes and he wants his help right away. And Holmes is just tries to put him off, right? I am very busy just now and I desire no distractions. And this is the kind of, Holmes who comes across as kind of gruff and, doesn't not interested in what people think or their feelings or anything when they approach him with something.
Well, it's hard to blame him though. I mean, when you're a doctor and people hear, "Oh, you're a doctor. I have this problem with X, Y, and Z." "Oh, you're a lawyer." That's a very common thing. And I'm sure that Holmes gets that wherever he goes, and he can't just take up every case that someone throws at him, every
Yep.
mystery, especially when most of them are not interesting to him. So I think this is his standard. Yes, could he be nicer? As usual, yes. And also, I can't blame him at all for saying, I am here for doing my own research. I am not working in a professional capacity at the moment. Why do you assume just because we're friends or acquaintances or friends of friends that I would do this for you? I think that shows a little bit of that fatigue that comes with any professional who gets that type of question from the people who know them.
I think it's two or three of the stories so far. He's been on vacation.
Just
And
trying to get away.
Yeah, yeah. It's like Murder She Wrote, Jessica Alba, like, oh, I'm out on a cruise, and suddenly there's a murder, and then she's got to solve it. So this is a murder of the week. It's always well here, but it's not a murder here. So
Pretty low stakes here.
yes. But it's not low stakes for Hilton Soames because it is essential to avoid scandal.
Sure.
And that's the key. I think that's the key that brings home in right away, because that's kind of a specialty of his in the way he solves so many cases, is that he does them in a way that to make sure that, I'm thinking like the Priory School, that we've done already, where, it seems more important for just as important for Holmes to cover up the kidnapping and everything that's happened at the end as it is to solve it. That he has to make sure that things get covered up to avoid scandal for people. He also gets paid a lot of money on that one.
But that's the benefit.
Yeah, I don't think that I'm not sure that he's actually that interested in covering up scandal. For him, I think it's solving the crime or the problem or whatever it is. Working his way through that is what's of interest to him. I mean, in Priory School, James Wilder basically offers to go to Australia to avoid scandal and any, discomfort about what he has done, which they allow him to do, of course. And the same with Gilchrist here, only it's Rhodesia, where he says, "It's okay. I'm gonna go to Rhodesia. I don't have to answer to any of my. I don't have to answer for any of my bad behavior because I'm leaving the country."
Here it's easy too. Like
At that point, he doesn't care. He's solved the mystery. If they want to cover it up, that's fine.
Right. Right. I agree. I don't think that it's his focus, but it often, I think, is a motivation, as explicitly said here, for why people come to him instead of the police, is that way they're hoping that they can control the information more because they're working with someone who is less concerned with the legal implications of or requirements of disclosure, for example.
Right.
So yeah, it is, you're right that there is a sort of reputational thing happening here. And as much, it's not just a scandal, this sort of in the air, like who gets in trouble for this? The tutor, Soames, would be in a lot of trouble for this.
Yeah.
Right? Because he was the one who was sort of negligent and left that out. And so there is this sense
absolutely.
that like yes, maybe he doesn't want the scandal for the college, but he clearly also doesn't want.
Absolutely. Yeah. I
Holmes
mean,
also
there is an argument. I was reading that there was an argument as to why he didn't, if he really wanted to keep this under wraps, why didn't he just switch it in the first place rather than, I mean, pick a different
Passage, yeah.
passage
know.
to do, since nobody would have seen the original one anyway.
Yeah, Doyle tries to kind of explain that away, that that's not possible, but it does seem a little
Yeah.
silly.
One
Yeah.
of the reasons, one of the ways that shows that Doyle did that is in the original manuscript, he had written the exam as the day after tomorrow, and then he crossed it out and wrote tomorrow, which is a reason that like it can't be printed up in time for tomorrow, and he didn't want to postpone the exam. So, but but the exam is for the Fortescue Scholarship. Um, and there is currently a Sherlockian Fortescue Scholarship. I will put a link in the chat there. That the Beacon Society does. The Beacon Society is a group dedicated to teaching younger people about Sherlock Holmes, as well as providing resources to all Sherlockians. And they have a certification program for, as they say, for those who like to take tests and solidify their Sherlockian knowledge. There is an honors program within 3 parts. It's an elementary tripos with, if you complete the exam there, you get your BSS degree, Baccalaureatus Scientia in Sherlockiana. And then if you got the BSS, you can take the advanced exam and get your AMS, the Artium Magister in Sherlockiana. And then you can go on and do a third exam or write a paper and get your SHD, Doctorate in Sherlockiana. Have you guys ever done any Fortescue exams? No. Curtis like, I'm done school.
How dare you? How dare you even suggest it?
Don't think so. May I interject one thing?
Yeah.
I was looking for this and I found it. I
Oh,
want to
good.
jump in. That talking about the essay, I mean the test, that he talks about, one of the ways that he talks about the fact that it's essential that it be done now, is that he had taken so long to prepare it, correct it for the press. And Ronald Knox notes, is it likely that only half a chapter of Thucydides would take the examiner an hour and a half to correct for the press? Half a chapter. So that's another reason why
Yeah, and that's something a classicist would say. Like, come on, it's just half a
that's
chapter of
ridiculous.
Thucydides.
Come on, people.
Well, Thucydides is like absolutely one of the obvious people that you're going to read, right?
Even
So
I've read
you would be
Thucydides.
very familiar with the text,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, you would.
I'm nodding like I actually know what you're talking about. But
full disclosure, my bachelor's is in classics.
You're a classics. Yeah, you were a classic scholar.
Yeah, no, you would need to proof it because there's no guarantee that the printer is setting the type, reads Greek sufficiently that they're going to remember the diacritical marks, for example, that are pretty important. However, reading over a passage that should not take very long. That does seem like a rather leisurely pace. I don't know how long it would take to, say, if you chose a new passage, to go to the printer and say, can you now set up this new passage instead? Like, that's true. That would probably take more than 24 hours. But I feel like you could ask for a rush, or the idea that you couldn't push back the exam a date,
right.
or any other excuse that you could make up,
Yeah.
instructor's sick, whatever, like, come on, we all know the excuses you have for not turning your homework in on time. Like, there are plenty.
Back to the Fortescue Scholarship. Rebecca, no, any interest ever in doing that? Have you? Because I'm sure you've heard of this, right?
Yeah, sure. No, I do not personally
You don't want an
have any
SHD?
interest in that. No.
They give you a certificate and everything. You can hang it on the wall, So
I am not that type of Sherlockian, honestly. I've never been the person who competes with in fact, I am the stick in the mud at Scion meetings, where when everyone does a quiz on a specific short story, I will opt out And you know, I know I'm like the boring one. I'm like, no, I'm not doing it because I hate competing because I am very competitive, which means I am a total jerk if I'm competing. And if I'm
There you
competing,
go.
I'm going to take it really, really seriously.
You're
Like,
sparing us. Thank you.
this is it. So
Because I
if
don't
you
want to compete
play-
with you.
no, no.
I feel like,
If you
yeah, I don't
want to
want that.
remain
You're
friends
going to
with
do too
me, we
much.
should never play a game together because after that, your opinion of me will have
There
changed.
you go.
So
See,
I opt out.
I'm the exact opposite. I can read a story. I've tried preparing for quizzes. I was a good doobie, and I would see that there was a quiz on,
Mhm.
on something. I would reread the story and be very serious about it, and then I would get to the meeting and have a drink, and the next thing I know,
I want,
whatever it was
yeah.
I had studied is gone, and I don't know. I've never won a quiz in my life or even done well.
I want to do them well, and I'm very competitive, and I want to do them well. But with Sherlock quizzes, it's because the people putting them together are always they're pulling out stuff, and I'm like, oh, are you kidding me? And what I always notice is the people that do well at them are frequently lawyers who are used to reading these texts that they
Close
get through,
reading.
and they have to remember these tiny little words and details, and they remember that stuff. So I'm always disappointed. They're fun to do as a group, though, and that's what I've learned too, is that when like three or four people get together and they're like, oh, let's do the quiz, then it becomes a lot of fun as a group effort.
Do you know, this occurs to me. I did win one once. I must have, because I was asked to prepare a quiz for a subsequent meeting. I am so bad at quizzes, I actually got two of the questions wrong. I was the person who had I did this whole thing. And I said, and whatever the answer was that I thought was wrong. And people
Good trick
came up to
question.
me and said, you're wrong. That so it isn't even a question of answering them. It's
Yeah.
even asking questions.
Yeah, you can remember all your lines, Curtis. So you're the one of the of us here who are trained to remember the
Mostly I
lines.
can, yes.
Well,
Well, maybe in that day it was the person who did the worst on the quiz had to make the next quiz.
yeah.
Maybe that's actually possible.
Well, I think I'm going to do this Fortescue with it, but I think what I'm going to do is wait until Sherlock Monthly is over, and then so this can be like my university and preparing for it.
There
So,
you go.
and then we can make a thing about it with viewers too, and maybe
Yeah.
some other people will want to do it after this whole series.
Hold up your certificate.
There you go.
Mm.
So it'll be like two of us,
Put it up there where Charles Dickens is right now.
That's it. Yeah. My Copper Beaches thing was up here, but that's down now. So, but I usually have some certificate hanging around there because I don't have a lot of degrees. So I gotta hang something on the wall. Um, all righty. Um, now we get Hilton Soames tells the story here, what happened. So here's the client recounting the case here, and there was, obviously it was the um he's preparing the translation or the text, and someone um someone and then he discovered the key was in the door when he leaves the room, but he comes back. Someone has obviously been in the room, looked at the test. It's the papers are scattered. um of course, Bannister, the servant, is completely trustworthy, so he's not included in here. He doesn't think he's got anything to do with it. I like Holmes's moment here where he says the proofs was in three long slips. One of them was lying on the floor, the other on the table near the window, and the third was where I left it. I'm sorry, Holmes. Uh, yeah, Holmes says that to him. So the first on the floor, the second in a window, and the third where you left it. How would you possibly know that? And then Holmes says continue. So he's already figuring things out of what's going on here. Holmes is already being like brought into the thing here, which usually it takes. See, usually it's the odd and it's the outre, as Doyle put it, that he pulls from Poe, that attracts Holmes to a case. And here, none of that, but he has the same reaction, that he's suddenly interested in it, and I just think honestly, I think it's a miss on Doyle's part in that he didn't have an odd thing here in this story that Sherlock would have been interested in. He's just interested in it anyway.
I think that the soil, the little bit, is the closest thing
And
to a
then,
point of
yeah,
interest for Holmes, and in some ways is catnip for Holmes, who is very interested in different types of soils.
once he's looking at it, yes, and realizing that Bannister sat in a different chair than he should have, then the wheels are really turning. But Holmes is immediately interested in this, and so Soames tells him that Bannister is, he nearly fainted and had, and we know why now that this is all kind of a ruse, and he collapsed in a chair. But there were also several shreds from a pencil. And this is Sherlockian. This is something Sherlock would be interested in, which had been sharpened and a broken tip of lead was lying there. And now when Sherlock says, "Excellent," said Holmes, who was recovering his good humor. "Excellent." I'm sure Soames is really glad that Holmes is really happy about this. Uh, and uh, and then there was also a cut on the table, so we're on the leather, covering for the writing table. So okay, he wants the matter settled quietly and discreetly. And then we get the range of Holmes asking questions, which usually leads up after a case has been stated. We find out about the student. The first one we found out about is Dolat Ross, an Indian student. And then we find out the others not until later. Which I thought was odd. Like, I don't know, I understand why he mentioned the one student first and then we're skipped, but maybe that'll come into play in how prejudiced everybody seems
Yeah,
against.
I have a whole theory, yeah, about that.
Is
I
that
do
for
think
now, or do you want to hit that when we hit Del at Ross later?
we can hit that when I hit him later. That's
Okay.
fine. We can do that. But I will say that, because we all agree, right? This is a very workman-like, phoned in story among the Sherlockian stories. And on the one hand, that doesn't make it that particularly interesting as a mystery. But on the other hand, what I like about that is that what it allows you to see is what Doyle saw himself as the sort of boxes he needed to check to make a Sherlockian mystery. He has to have so many red herrings. He has to have so many suspects. He needs to, so it actually is almost a bare bones outline with not a lot of action. So as you see him checking these boxes, here is the evidence. Next, who are the suspects? And I find that as a sort of structure-based reveal about Doyle's approach interesting, where the story itself is not so much.
The Yeah, and we'll see how and we'll see how all that plays out as we keep going, because I absolutely agree with that. The and Also for me, so he's got that kind of that structure that he lays out, but then he throws out these little things in there which are very character based, which I do enjoy in this. And one of them is at the end of this first section here, which is just him insulting Watson again.
Yeah.
Not one of your cases, Watson. Mental, not physical. Poor Watson, right? The he's the what was the worst one that he did? You are not yourself luminous, but you are a conductor of light. And almost sounds like, oh, you complimenting me? No, you're not at all.
Well, and the thing is, you do get the sense that Holmes doesn't realize that he's being insulting, which is kind of
Yes.
worse, because then there's this added note of condescension to it. But I
Yeah.
do like the reference here a little bit, that of Watson being the muscle. There is this sense that Holmes, despite his own, physical prowess, still cedes certain ground to Watson.
And he's firmly become that by, by this part in the stories. Even though the first several stories, it's nothing Watson complaining about how he's injured and how he can't do things and he can't keep up with Sherlock and his injury prevents him from doing things. And then he quickly becomes, even though the stories jump around in a chronological order, but from now, from from long before this till now, he is the man of action. And Doyle, as the author too, sees them as these are the two of the characteristics of the main characteristics. Holmes is mental, Watson is his physically able, sidekick. But there's still also a lot of genuine emotional warmth between these two, and consideration. So that I wonder if I really go through and examine all of the stories and pull out all these emotional moments between them, if there aren't far more moments where Holmes is actually considerate of Watson than when he does this and is inconsiderate of him. Because this inconsiderate of his feelings is the myth of Holmes, and that's what people remember more. But when you really look in the stories, you find that actually, but not in this story, far, because it's told like three times, I think, in this story. You find that there are more moments where it is the textbook of friendship, as Christopher Morley called it.
That's true, and but Watson also does say at the beginning of this story, he makes a point of talking about the fact that Holmes is irritable and short-tempered because he's away from his books and his, whatever it is that he's away from, that's at Baker Street that is not here. And so it seems natural that what would be a normal short-tempered part of his character is even more so.
Yeah. It's got nothing to do with him researching English charters.
No, probably not. No.
That's catnip for Holmes. They arrive to the scene of the crime here now. Kind of a crime. I was well, we can get later. Like, what is the crime? Is it technically theft?
Cheating.
Cheating,
Yeah.
Which is again not a crime. Yeah, but
didn't cheat yet. He just, I don't know. So it winds up being
I don't know. Do you have to actually cheat on the test for it to be cheating when you're prepping for, like, when is the act of cheating complete?
Yes.
Because I think if you have written down, if you have
If I
seen
plan the robbery and then don't commit the robbery, I haven't stolen anything.
Well, but that's crime though, not cheating.
Yeah.
So, because for example, seeing even what passage it is.
That's all it would be anyway, right? I mean, it's not that he's stolen anything. He's written down. That's why you have the the pencil being sharpened and the thing. He's scribbled down. Now, anybody, I would think, I don't know. You could answer this, Rebecca, that somebody is able to determine what first sentence.
You could just cut out a little bit, Curtis. Can you say that again?
No. I was asking, he was writing, he didn't need to copy out the whole half.
Yeah.
Right? All he would have needed was the first sentence to know he could then go home and say, okay, this is what I'm going to have for tomorrow.
Yeah, when I read that part, I was like, this is a stupid student. Like, you're way harder on yourself.
I mean, it shouldn't have required breaking the pencil and sharpening it. I mean, really, technically, if he studied it, all he would need to do is look at it and be able to figure it out.
First and last sentence. That's all I needed.
I suppose there's a chance that it was not identified. I mean, typically with this type of passage, right, this sight unseen translation, they tell you at the beginning, this is from Thucydides, book 2, whatever, and that it does get headed like that as a standard. However, maybe on the proofs that wasn't there, and so it wasn't even identified as Thucydides, and the student whose Greek isn't that good anyway doesn't recognize it as Thucydides, and so can't just do the first and last line to go look up elsewhere because they wouldn't know where to look it up.
Oh, I see.
Right? So if it wasn't labeled, then maybe, sure. But typically, that's passages like this do get labeled as a matter of course. But I don't know. What do I know about
as something they would have been studying?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, again, I suppose that the person who was cheating was not all that great at Greek, and so that's why they were cheating. So they were not thinking things through anyway.
Yeah.
They were clearly in a panicked state.
And it's probably one of the speeches, because Thucydides is known for this, putting all these speeches from people in there. And that's a little harder to identify what's the speech refer to. So you might need a little more to.
Maybe, but that's the thing that's so weird about choosing Thucydides is on the one hand, there are harder passages in Thucydides, really tricky passages, like not for beginners. But on the other hand, students at this point would have organically come across Thucydides by this point, you would think, because he is such a basic author. And so it is a weird choice to say, okay, I'm going to give you Thucydides, something that you may have already read. Instead, you should pick something obscure. That's typically the way that these sight unseen passages work, is the instructors choose things that they are like, there's no way the student has run across this before. And sorry, Greek students do run across Thucydides regularly. That's part of the instruction typically. So it is a weird choice.
So for Rebecca, so that means that I'm assuming that what the assignment would be for this would be, here is a passage of Greek, translate it.
Yeah, and ideally, here's a passage of Greek that you have never seen before. So you don't have the advantage even of context. You don't have the advantage of necessarily knowing right before what the style is going to be, or even what dialect of Greek, right? Like that, all those things affect how you're going to read it. But again, if you know it's Thucydides, if it's labeled, then you do know that it's Attic Greek, for example, and you know what dialect you're working with. But with this, I don't know. You would pick Thucydides in a more basic thing, for more basic students, because otherwise they would have run across it already. That's what I'm getting caught on. If you're really looking for a traditional sight unseen that you're really thinking that they haven't seen before. His sight reading is ancient languages at the student level is incredibly difficult. So that's why it's a tough exam. But if you've gone through it before and there's a tricky word or a tricky conjugation, it's like once you've kind of worked out that puzzle, it sticks with you. So if it's a passage you're familiar with, that's not nearly as hard to translate as a, complete new one that you're trying to do in the moment.
Got it.
Yeah, I know that. Sorry, that was way too much student information
No,
for me.
actually, I mean, that's
what we love
interesting
in
to
this.
me, because I don't know, because I don't know any of this.
Yeah.
It's fascinating because I wouldn't know what this exam was.
Thank you, Rebecca. That's what we do on this show. These kind of detailed rabbit holes. We all love it. This audience loves that kind of thing. And then, of course, there's Max McGee in the chat here. Richard Nixon just whispered in my ear, the crime wasn't as bad as the cover-up.
Yeah,
They
again, I think Soames is just the embarrassed one here.
yes. The so well, when they arrive, Holmes right away sees the window and he goes up and he goes on his tiptoes and looks in. And this we know is how he's figuring out already. He's just figuring out this case. One of the things I love in Sherlock stories is once you know the ending and you go back, you see that unlike a fair play mystery story, which you can figure out, well, you should be able to figure out as you go along. You can't really figure these out as you go along, but it's all there. But he does show the moments where he has noticed things that you can notice. And this, I think, is very influential in the development of the mystery story as it continues into fair play stories.
I think it also shows Holmes' talent for this sort of visualization. I don't have a memory like this. My mind doesn't really work in this way of imagining if someone is walking by, how they may or may not be able to look in a window. Like that's just not a way that my brain works. I don't think about the placement of people in a room. And to be fair, that is, I think, something you can be trained to do, right? That's the whole point of detective work, is you're learning how people leave evidence. But it is fun to go back and to see how Holmes from the very beginning has visualized exactly every step and every action that's been taken by the culprit based on the evidence. He actually can kind of see the person in the room.
And this is what he tells the detectives, that like it's which was the Stanley Hopkins. He tells them it's imagination that you need is key for solving these cases.
Mm-hmm. You're muted, Curtis.
You're
Still
muted.
muted.
You're muted, Curtis. There you go.
I don't know how that happened. So the question I have about this is, Holmes looks out the window, looks in the window, um, which, I mean, I understand how that would be part of his process. But in fact, Gilchrist would, even if he saw the papers rolled up and was able to figure out that they were the test he was going to take, would not have been able to get in to read them if Bannister hadn't left his keys in the door, correct?
Yes.
So it's not really a completely thought through thing.
No, it is by chance. And he will say that later. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just a,
Part of his defense later. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and Holmes kind of makes this point that it needs to be someone tall, tall enough to kind of
Yeah.
see. And
right,
I don't think that is necessarily true because all you need to see is the key in the door,
exactly.
the opportunity. And then, as he points out another point, like you could open it and, if you look in and there's someone's there, you could pretend that you're asking a question. So
Right.
I don't actually think the height requirement that Holmes gives is in fact necessary. You don't need to peer in advance.
No.
All right. Well, we're going to get to that in a bit.
Yeah, we're going a little
I don't know if I agree with that, but so we'll get to it in a bit. But
oh,
but
you want to argue now?
when we hit that moment later, we'll definitely go into it more. Now that I've replenished my gin and tonic, I'm gonna take a quick moment to thank everybody for watching this, and also encourage you again to if you want to make a donation to the Rosenbach, that would be absolutely great. Or you could become a member. You can do this at our website, rosenbach.org. Not only does helping donating or becoming a member help us create programs like this, help us care for our collections, like we have with the Doyle books and the new Lippincott's that we have in our collection. But if you're a member, you also get early access to registration, and there are a bunch of new programs and courses that are coming up right now in the summer. We're actually doing more in the summer now than we have done in the past because our audience seems to want it. And if you go to rosenbach.org and click on signature programs, you can see some of these things we have here: behind the bookcase tours, Mexico, Race and Revolution in the Borderlands, a course on Mansfield Park with Juliet Wells, a phenomenal Austin scholar and professor at Goucher College, who has just curated the new exhibition at the Morgan Library in New York on Jane Austen that is open now for people to go and see. I haven't been up to see it yet, but I hope to get up there soon. We have a Behind the Bookcase tour on Robert Burns. Behind the Bookcase tours is we bring out the books and manuscripts and present them to a small group of people, up to 12 people, and we talk about them and we pass them around, put these items in your hands for you to examine up close. There's a Sherlock Holmes Behind the Bookcase tour that I'm actually not doing. One of my colleagues at the Rosenbach is doing. I designed this one last year and put it in place. That's actually my deerstalker hat in the picture. And you can come and do that. I'm doing this Behind the Bookcase tour on our Melville collection in early August. If you can come to the Rosenbach in person, I'll do this tour with we have one of the greatest Melville collections in the world at the Rosenbach. And then there's another course, a second course in the summer. These are online courses. Mansfield Park is online. And this course here on Lord of the Rings with Michael Drought, a phenomenal Tolkien scholar. Rebecca, you could take this course,
Oh my gosh,
get you in.
that would be amazing.
Michael Drought is an extraordinary Tolkien professor. He has a book coming out on Tolkien in December this year called The Tower, and I'll click on and find out because now is it The Tower and the Ruin? It is called The Tower and the Ruin, J.R.R. Tolkien's creation. And I'm very excited to have this Lord of the Rings course at the Rosenbach because we have Lord of the Rings in our collection. And that's a picture of it there. We have the first American edition that was actually Marion Moore's. The poet Marion Moore had this, and we have all of her archives and her book collection at the Rosenbach. And she actually took some notes at the end of Fellowship of the Ring. She wrote some little notes in the back of the book, which is very interesting for a major poet to do.
Do we know what
Although,
she thought of it? Yeah.
but the Two Towers and Return of the King, they don't look, they're really tight. I think she just read the Fellowship, and that's what she had to do. But there's book arts courses on binding community cookbooks, book arts course on calligraphy, lots of wonderful things to do during the summer at the Rosenbach or online with our 2 online courses. So the registration is open for members now. That's one of the reasons I mentioned membership. If you're a member now, you can register for this now. And next week, on June 27th, if you're watching live or close to live, it's June 27th is when membership registration opens to the general public. But members get first crack at these things, and they do fill up. The course, both of these courses, I imagine, are going to fill up this summer. Our courses are discussion based. They're not just kind of lectures by a talking head. They're a group of us in a Zoom meeting having a discussion about these great books, and that's what I think makes them valuable and helps us create more, communities of readers at the Rosenbach. So, a little commercial for the things coming up soon. I can't wait for the Lord of the Rings course too, Rebecca. I am so excited about that. I've got all my Tolkien books behind me. I'm all ready to start doing some Tolkien reading this summer, which I do all the time anyway. But
you all nailed it with Michael Trout. That's
but
very
Michael Trout, my favorite Tolkien scholar, and he said yes immediately. I was so excited, I couldn't believe it. So I thought, who would I want to teach this? Michael Trout, and then he said yes right away. So I couldn't believe it. I was so excited. All righty. Holmes is now in the rooms, and Soames is and he figures out how everything worked. He carried over the first one as he copied it. He tossed it down. He sees the next slip, and then the pencil. Holmes right away. He says the pencil was not an ordinary, and now he gives this great Sherlock description. The pencil was not an ordinary one. It was above the usual size with a soft lead. The outer color was dark blue. The marker's name was printed in silver lettering, and the piece remaining is only about 1.5 inches long. Look for such a pencil, Mr. Soames, and you have got your man. Oh, and by the way, he possesses a large and very blunt knife. Amazes him, and then he says, "How do you know the maker?" And then Holmes says, "There's the letters NN are left on the pencil." So, and he says it must have been a Johann Faber pencil. So, as he has deduced from the evidence. And then he also recognizes that he says, "Where does that door lead to?" "To my bedroom." "Have you been in since your adventure?" "No, I came straight away to you." Holmes right away recognizes that, wait, the way this is set up, that's where he went. Like, he couldn't have gone out the door because you came in. And then Soames says he must have gone out the window. He didn't go out the window. He was.
Well, have they examined the cut at this point? Because that, I think, is the main thing that points to the bedroom. Like the sort of slice on the desk.
Yeah. Well, no, the little piece of putty is that Holmes finds also in the bedroom, right?
Yeah,
He does.
What leads him to the bedroom is the direction of the.
Is the direction.
He says the cut, a positive tear, it began with a thin scratch and ended in a jagged hole. And the way that is angled shows that the person had sort of a propulsion in the manner, in the direction of the door, which he then says that where does that door lead to? To my bedroom. So he's essentially saying right there, that's where the person went, and no one else picks up on that.
And now we get into the suspects, and it's Gilchrist, who is a fine scholar and athlete. Even though his father was the notorious Sir Jabez Gilchrist, who ruined himself on the turf, Gilchrist is, industrious, hardworking. So, clearly it's not him. And then Dolat Ross, the Indian, he is a quiet, inscrutable fellow, as most of those Indians are. So right away we get the prejudice creeping in that, like, and that they're gonna suspect him if only because he's Indian, and then they'll say something else later again, which which speaks to that racism as well. And then there's Miles McLaren, extraordinarily bright, but wayward, dissipated, unprincipled, nearly expelled over a card scandal. Miles is having the kegger up in his room while everybody else is trying to study. So that's the one he suspects, obviously, because, that's the kind of student he is.
Very strong kind of compare and contrast among the three suspects too.
Yeah.
It keeps it. That's another thing about this that's actually, again, kind of box checking rather than interesting, is here are three personalities. Each one is different. Who could it be?
I do find it fascinating that he brings an Indian student in. Doyle does. That's
Well,
one of the characters that he would.
do we want to talk about that now? Because I have a theory about
Go
this.
for it.
Okay, so I mean, he's set up essentially as an outsider, and he is an outsider. And I think that that is one of the ways that Doyle is checking off the red herring box, is it serves as a red herring for his readers who are bringing a racist interpretation. If you are not bringing that interpretation, then you're not going to catch that as a red herring. You're just going to be like, it's a guy he's studying a methodical, but Greek is his weak subject. Those are the things you're going to get caught on. Whereas if you, in his 1904 audience, say, oh, that's a guy who really keeps to himself, like, oh, and he's Indian, then he is planting a red herring only for people who get caught on their own racism. And I think that's actually a really clever way to do a red herring. Like you're only going to fall for it if you already are primed for it by faulty thinking. So that's my theory on why he's done it that way, because we know statistically immigrants commit far less crimes than citizens, and he is an outsider. He is reacting like an outsider. Of course he is, because he is an Indian student at Cambridge.
And he's treated as an outsider.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that exists as the context with this. And I think Doyle is playing with that context actively to throw in an extra red herring.
Yeah. And especially at a time when people aren't necessarily aware of red herrings and mystery stories yet.
There's a lot in here, though. I mean, he does that really, that's part of his system.
Yeah. He also Holmes questions Bannister again. Why did you sit on that chair? Why'd you pass over these chairs? To very much signal to the reader that something's going on with Bannister here, and Holmes knows something that he doesn't that he hasn't revealed yet. But it's not the kind of true. I say it's not the kind of true fair play story, and that because you can't know the connections yet to this stuff. Like you don't know there were gloves left there. And once or
Holmes didn't know either, yeah.
Well, yeah, that's true. Holmes just deduced that. But the piece of clay, until Holmes finds out where it's from, then there's no real way, I think, to do. I thought it was an eraser. I can remember thinking when I first read this that it must have been some kind of eraser, because it said it was like this rubber bit of lump, or this clay lump, and I thought, oh, is that some kind of eraser? And I didn't know what to make of that.
I mean, we do technically we know that we've already been given the evidence of the lump, right, of the clay or whatever, and we do hear here that one of the suspects is an athlete, working in a number of different fields, as opposed to, one person who keeps only to himself and another guy who's probably drinking up in his room. So you do, in fact, do have a little bit of a indicator there if you're looking for it. The first, as you say, if you go back and reread the story, it has been planted in there, even if it's not so obvious. It sounds like he's almost distracting you with the fact that he's creating this good old boy description of Gilchrist.
I'm going to throw this question out there for any first-time readers in the audience, and did you have any? Did you recognize that one guy is upright, and of course it's not him? That perhaps that was him right off the bat, or did you, how you guys thought of these suspects if you were reading this story for the first time? The pencil. is well, Holmes goes and visits them all. Well, he visits two of them because Miles McLaren's not even going to let him in the room. But for the other two, Holmes he breaks his pencil, and then he asks to borrow one, and then he asks for a knife to trim it, and so he's clearly testing what these people have already, if it matches the pencil and the knife that would have fixed it. And McLaren won't let them in the room though. And why he won't is interesting. He says, "I don't care who you are, you can go to blazes. Tomorrow's the exam, and I won't be drawn by anyone." He's busy studying, or he's busy figuring out the thing that he's already stolen. I guess it can work that way too.
Well, and you would say you're studying. That would be the excuse,
Yes.
whether you were or not, right? So he doesn't, yeah, he doesn't implicate himself, but he doesn't exactly not implicate himself.
And then Holmes asked about how tall they all are. Or we asked how tall McLaren is because he's seen the other two, and he's taller than the Indian, not so tall as Gilchrist. I suppose 5'6" would be about it, and that is very important," said Holmes. So, and then, all right, I'll see you. I'll drop by tomorrow. Don't worry about anything. And Holmes is like, what are you talking? We're just gonna leave. I love when Holmes does this in stories. He's like, okay, all right, I'll see you tomorrow. Don't worry. But I'll take the black clay and the pencil cuttings with me. He does. And says to Watson, "Quite a little parlor game, sort of a 3-card trick, is it not? These are your 3 men. It must be one of them. You take your choice. Which is yours?" And I love that from Doyle too, that like now he's throwing out there at the reader, like, we put everything together here, which is, this is the choose your own adventure now. Who are you going to choose and which way are you going to go with this adventure?
Yeah, you can forgive him a little the simplicity of it when he turns it into that rhetorical flourish.
Yeah.
You're like, all right, okay, we see what you're doing.
Watson, of course, suspects, McLaren because, that's what he always does. In any story where Holmes ever asks Watson who he suspects or what he suspects, it's always the most obvious choice, of course. And yet that Indian was a sly fellow also, he has to say. So, but neither of them, but Watson doesn't suspect Gilchrist. And then Holmes asks about Bannister, the servant, and Watson thinks he's perfectly honest. And Holmes is like, "Yeah, he does seem. So why?" And then he doesn't finish. So Holmes doesn't know why, he's not being completely honest because Holmes can figure out what actually happened in the room. So why wouldn't Bannister say what happened? Because he's covering something up. All righty.
This is one of my favorite Sherlockian or Holmes specific personality traits is his ability not to talk. Like anyone else is like, "Oh, I figured it out. I want to tell you." And Holmes is like, "All in good time." Like that patience, that ability to sit on something and to wait until it's fully for like I love that because it is exactly, I think, for a reader what pulls you in because
Mhm.
you want, he knows, and you're like, tell me, Holmes, and he won't. And I think that that trait in a person is very unusual,
Yeah.
very
And he needs to tie up all the loose ends. He will never reveal it. And
exactly
even though, like, I've figured this out, I know who it
right.
is, but I've got to figure out these 2 loose ends. So then now he goes and he goes to the stationers to find out about the pencils, and he strikes out there. But then the next morning he'll go and he'll find a lump of clay. Like I have to get the final piece
Yeah.
before I will, do anything here, even though he's figured it out.
His pride is very much in his rigor rather than the very idea of solving it. Like he knows he's going to solve it. The thing that's appealing to him is making sure that he has been truly thorough about it. And then he's excited and will tell you.
Yeah. Well, now they're going to go off back to their inn. And I love his little Shakespeare reference here. And the landlady babbled of green peas at 7:30. Little, Shakespearean reference pun there going on. It's the hostess and about Falstaff. Babbled of green fields in Henry V. And but I just bring it up because he's being very lighthearted here. Holmes went from being irascible in the beginning to being interrupted to now he's making puns and jokes by the end here. So this has brought him out of the drudgery of English charters research and is feeling pretty good about himself. And then with Watson, he says, "What with your eternal tobacco, Watson, and your irregularity at meals, I suspect you will get notice to quit, and that I shall share your downfall." This is from the problems with the landlady, but yet it's Holmes's eternal tobacco and irregularity at meals, as we've learned in previous stories, that is problematical with Mrs. Hudson. So,
Yeah, can we also point out that he says the irregularity with meals, and then the next morning he's like, Watson, let's skip breakfast.
Yeah.
yeah.
Like it's clearly coming from Holmes.
That he's making a joke about. Like yeah, because what I think is going on here is that Holmes knows that he has the problem with tobacco and
Yes,
meal.
yes.
And so he's poking fun with Watson here.
Yeah,
And then Holmes proposes the worst title for the story, which would have been "The Problem of the Nervous Tutor, the Careless Servant, and the Three Enterprising Students." So this is why Watson titles and writes the stories and not Holmes. Well, Holmes has solved it by the morning. He just says to Watson, "Yes, I have solved the mystery." But it's because he put in 2 hours hard work, covered at least 5 miles, and have something to show for it. He got he found another lump of clay, and that's so now I have the final piece of the puzzle. Um, and they go back to Soames's rooms, and I like how they prepare this little courtroom setting, like it's like a little private court of inquiry here, and the three chairs, and we'll sit here, and they're I guess the judges and the jury, and then they'll bring in each person to give an account here, but he only needs two people to give the account.
Well, I think yeah, the drama of this, I mean, Holmes likes drama, first of all, but also Bannister has proven, a tough nut to crack. So he's clearly doing this too as another way to exert pressure on him.
And he lays it out right off the bat. "So, what did you conceal when you sat down in that chair?" And Bannister's like, "What? How did you know that?" Um, uh, and and Holmes says, "Well, clearly you were, hiding someone in the room, and someone was hiding in the bedroom, and you didn't know what had happened." And then Bannister, and then Holmes says, "Up to now you have spoken the truth, but now I know that you lied." When Bannister says there's no one in the bedroom, so he leads Bannister into just out and out lying. And then they bring Gilchrist in. Holmes doesn't need to bring the other people in because he knows they didn't do it. And then again, it's another trick of a question. And he says, because right away he says to Gilchrist, "What? I can't believe you committed this crime yesterday." And so Gilchrist looks right at Bannister, thinking he must have dimed him out. And Bannister's like, "I never said a word." "Ah, but you have now," said Holmes. So that's a fun little moment here. That if you do in a mystery now, it's like, oh, come on, that's just such a cliche. But this is why it's a cliche, because Doyle came up with these wonderful scenes, and other mysteries did too at the time, that really work then for readers in a new way. And now Gilchrist this is where he goes on his knees in the table. This is that initial illustration that we saw for this story. I don't need to share it again. But again, it's as I went through usually I talk about two or three of the Pagets, and they're all just guys standing in a room talking to each other.
The Colliers are better for this
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, and Doris Steele really does, they're kind of even like little portraits or little scenes. The way, especially because the way he does shadows and the contrast between the light and the dark, and all of his illustrations tend to be really interesting. And really fresh for these stories. There are people who don't like Paget, and I'm always surprised when they don't like Paget illustrations. But I do encounter them, and I never know why. And then, but the door steals are really really vivid.
Yeah. It's
And
interesting that a number of the Pagets too, just kind of scrolling through, don't have a lot of the backgrounds filled in. And I feel like Frederick Dorr Steele is definitely playing up the sort of Gothic looking or architecture, the context, the place quite a bit more than it seems like Paget was. I don't know if that has anything to do with the different audiences or if that was again just more of Steele's inherent drama that he's
I
bringing.
do. I notice it when Paget has background or when there's like people in the background. So I'm like, wow, look at that. That's not like you usually do. So
Right. He does these sort of
yeah,
vignettes almost.
contains the scene. These are the characters, and frequently is very good at placing characters from this dramatic composition and knows how to put them in a scene.
Mhm.
But this one was hard.
Mhm.
Just not a lot going on. So what could have been illustrated in this story that would have been exciting? I'm just trying to.
Well, again, like the Frederick Dorr Steele cover, he made that interesting with the dramatic
Yeah.
shadow and the lamp in the front. He did that completely out of composition because the subject was inherently not. It's just a
Mhm.
guy pointing, with a desk in front of him.
Is
But
this a difference between American publication readers and what they expect in a magazine story and what British readers were still expecting? Just these, I want a scene from the story that is telling me exactly what's going on.
No, it feels to me when you look at that cover that, I mean, this is the J'accuse moment where he's pointing at Gilchrist and saying, "You did it." And with the fact that you're using basically Gillette's face uh, in this dramatic moment, feels to me like a theatrical moment. And
Hmm.
it does truly fit in that he's trying to come up with something that makes it look interesting.
Hmm.
And the fact that it's based on Gillette makes it feel that way.
I think one of the things that I love so much about Paget is also he's illustrating a world here that for me now reading now is so distant. It's over 100 years ago, and so I like those in that I feel like I'm being taken back into someplace else. But clearly, the audience at the time, it's not that long ago. The story is set, so they're not necessarily being taken back in time by the illustration of these scenes as I am.
I do think, and maybe this is stretching it, but I do think that there is a sense of slightly different generations in the illustrators because Paget establishes the style for the Holmes stories and how he's going to approach illustrating them in the 1890s, whereas Frederick Dorr Steele is starting in the early 1900s, right? He starts with the Colliers. Is that correct? I believe.
Yeah.
And given that, I mean, that's a decade of time. And when you look at them, you do see one is a late Victorian style, and the other is that sort of progressive
Yeah.
era, much more Big Bang kind of look that, I think you do get the different aesthetics from two different artists who have two different perceptions and approaches. And also there is a 1890s versus 1900s. Those are two different decades
Yeah.
artistically, given the starting points for each of those. Paget is continuing on in something he has already established,
Yeah.
whereas with Collier's, you're starting something new.
Door Steel gets to do the reset.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
After the death, after Hound, this is the reset. And
It's a little bit of the modern
yeah,
Holmes,
bring it up into
so-called
the
modern
present day.
Holmes.
Yeah. So,
Mhm.
all righty. Gilchrist breaks down and then Holmes just says, "Okay, let me tell you all what happened." And just recounts this is, what I put together. A tall man needed to be see through the window that this stuff was there, and then comes in and perceived the key was left by the carelessness of your servant. And a sudden impulse came over him. Holmes even defends him in a sense, like it's only because he saw the key and he realized, I could go get this. Um, he had put his gloves on the chair, and Bannister had sat down on them to hide them because, well, Holmes doesn't know why yet. Bannister was protecting Gilchrist. And then the clay pits, and Holmes now reveals, I found this other piece of clay in the jumping pit. So I knew it was obviously the athlete of these three scholars who was in the room. Gilchrist saves the day and saves himself by saying, but I actually had written this letter already. Saying, I've been offered a commission in the Rhodesian, in Rhodes, South Africa, police, and I'm going to go there and not take the test. And I love this bit in the story because the Rhodesian police well, first there's I'll get to that in a second. The Rhodesia named for Cecil Rhodes, who also has there's a Sherlockian connection to Rhodes. Either one of you want to? Rhodes scholar. Christopher Morley was a Rhodes scholar, and both of his brothers, actually, Frank and Felix, may have possibly been the only three brothers who have only had Rhodes scholarships. So, but that moment in the story is also, and this frequently turns up in Sherlock stories, the colonies, the British Empire. That's the place where people go for opportunity after they've done something wrong. I mean, it's frequent. Also, they've done something wrong there, and they come back, and then those places are not good. But it is a place that he can go and redeem himself. He can't do it in England. He has to go elsewhere to be considered a good citizen again.
Yeah, it is kind of an ex machina ending, isn't it? He doesn't have to really take any responsibility, and nothing really occurs because, ta-da, he has a job offer that he has decided.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then we get the denouement of the story is interesting because what it is it's an explanation of why Bannister protected Gilchrist, and that it turns out I was serving for his father. I mean, we hate coincidence now in fiction, but in the past they loved it. He had helped kind of raise him and knew his father and always wanted to protect him. So, wasn't it natural, sir, that I should save him? And wasn't it natural also that I should try to speak to him as his dead father would have done and make him understand that he could not profit by such a deed? Could you blame me, sir? Doyle's leaving this up there is that the moral quandary of this story is right there in in these rhetorical questions you get at the end of it, that can you blame him? Is there a crime committed? No.
Crime would be stretching it. Crime is probably not the right word.
And even the cheating itself, as we were talking about earlier, is, it was an opportunity, and he saw it, and he went in, and then he immediately regretted it, right? So
I don't know. I feel like there could be an alternate read here. Like we have established that Bannister lies, right? And given that, we also might consider that he is lying about trying to reform Gilchrist, and that in fact he left the key there on purpose when Gilchrist was coming by and was worried about the exam. And Bannister's like, oh, well, maybe I'll just turn my head away, and what you do in the 15 minutes that I've left my key in the door, that's up to you, And then afterwards, he's like, oh, no, no, I told him he shouldn't have done that. I don't know that we can believe anything Bannister says now. Like Doyle has added a sort of moral here, right? Of this is what your father would have said, but I don't know. Maybe I'm being too cynical. Am I being too cynical?
Curtis, too cynical?
No, I just think I think that he's paving the way here through Bannister to make us think it's all right for this upper class guy to cheat and then pay no consequences for it and go off to Rhodesia and become a cop.
Yeah.
Which is another issue. And then that's all he's doing, is making a sentimental pitch to his readers that this kind old gentleman was looking out for the boy that he dandled on his knees. To me, it's a big disappointment of an ending on all scales.
You think that's very different from earlier stories too? And I'm thinking again, Priory School, and how, the Lord,
Priory School, the same thing happens.
but he's so critical of those people
He's
and
critical, but
everything that they've done.
the guy just says, "I'm going to Australia, bye." And
Yeah.
Wilder, I'm talking about, he just goes to Australia, so he's off the hook too. You have to be at a certain class in order to get away with it in the Holmes stories.
Mhm. Well, in Holmes, it's true, he doesn't call Bannister on it, but the way that he just sort of dispenses with it at the end, like, "No, indeed," Holmes said heartily, springing to his feet. He's
Yes,
like,
congratulations.
yeah, well, and there's this sense that, like, he's not even gonna call Bannister on his BS, even
No,
knowing that it's probably there, because that's
but
not what's interesting to him.
yeah, that's the thing, is that what he is doing here, this is a Doyle thing as much as a Sherlock Holmes thing. It's Doyle making the reader feel okay about not having the criminal
Hmm.
pay any consequences.
Mhm.
Um, it's also Holmes, because it is sort of shocking the way he jumps up and says, "Congratulations, I hope you do well in Rhodesia.
Yeah,
Now I'm going back to the library."
I mean, that's the last line is, "I trust that a bright future awaits you in Rhodesia. For once you have fallen low, let us see in the future how high you can rise." I mean, that's so hopeful. And I'm fascinated that it's hopeful in that you can go off to this other part of the empire and rise again and be this. And because is this something that has developed with Doyle over his life, that by this point in his life, the empire is this place where that has this bright future, because there are so many criminals from the parts of the colonies in earlier stories, and now this is the opposite.
Well, and part of what Doyle is doing here, I think, is something that a lot of writers do, which is that they use rhetoric. They use their emotional, appeal to kind of magic trick, look over here instead of what's actually happening here, which is, here's a guy getting away with something, right? But that rhetorical flourish for "once you have fallen low, let us see in the future how high you can rise." If it didn't end that way, I think readers would be very much like, "Wait, what just happened?" But you get this nice quotable thing at the end, and you're like, "Oh, isn't that so well said? Yes, when we do rise low, maybe we can rise high." And it creates this kind of sense that distracts you from the point at hand. Like, that's what a lot of writers do, is they take advantage of saying something well, saying something beautifully or aspirationally, and it distracts from the substance.
Hmm.
And you're like, "Wait, what just happened?"
All righty.
In pretty
Well,
words.
it's either a very hopeful ending, or we can be very, very cynical about it and say it's not
I'll
kind
go
of.
with cynical.
There you go.
Curtis
Um,
and I are a cynical pair, apparently. You
I
could get a
tell you,
completely different read from two other guests.
I'm the only one drinking alcohol here. I think that's I'm okay with it.
But
So
you're the
That
optimist.
may be it.
Yes.
that's what it takes. A good shot of gin to make it palatable.
Mhm.
But all in all, I think it is. I think, as you mentioned earlier, Rebecca, it's a very well constructed story. It is, Doyle understands how to craft these things, um, but he doesn't have the exciting, material for this one.
Right. He doesn't have the idea, but he still
Yeah,
has this skill, the craft.
yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, and reading them as a series, is this 12, which became 13 stories in this series. Um, uh, yeah, this is the one that, this is one of the things that Doyle complained about, that I don't have this. I can't keep doing, I can't keep coming up with these kind of ideas. And then he recycles stories, and it's the same kind of story, just told in a different way.
And
Uh,
wasn't the original contract specifying at least eight, and then
Yeah. And
a
then
dozen or
then he
13?
signed up, and yeah, and when Collier first starts printing them,
And
uh,
this is number nine.
as soon as he agrees to 12, then then they say, and there's going to be 12 stories in this series. And then he actually adds the 13th with the second stain. So, for more money, but maybe that's what it is. Hey, let's get real cynical and say he's only them for money.
Yeah, writers are not, they are not living in some independent world where money has no effect on what they produce.
And thank goodness, because there are so many spectacularly great Sherlock stories that we wouldn't have had not Doyle been offered so much money to write them. Because he just would have kept cranking out, other story. He would have kept cranking out more, Sir Nigel's and then
Company, yeah.
Yeah, and White Company that aren't nearly as good.
You thought they were.
He did, and
We're maybe not always the best judges of our own work, though.
Yes. Well, but it's also, or just time changes, what we find exciting in stories. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us for episode 40 of Sherlock Monthly. Curtis and Rebecca, thank you.
Thank you.
On this biblioventure with us. Again, we'll be taking off, I'll be taking off a couple months just from this endeavor. And picking up in September 2025 with the next Sherlock story as it was originally published, The Adventure of the Golden Pince-Nez. I haven't lined up all the co-hosts for the next season yet, but I will very soon. Thank you to the sponsor of Sherlock Monthly, Lisa Washington. We couldn't do these shows without the generous support of our patrons. You can support the Rosenbach through donation. Your support helps us create more programs like this and also care for our collections. You can also become a member. Membership gives you early access and discounts to programs and courses. We have 2 great courses online starting this summer, Mansfield Park and Lord of the Rings. You can find out more at our website, rosenbach.org. Again, that remind you all again to subscribe to this Rosenbach YouTube channel and to like these videos if you so choose. Thank you everyone for watching this ongoing series. Everybody that's in the audience today who have been on this run now that we've begun with the Sherlock Monthly. I hope these have been pleasurable for you, and I hope you will continue with me for the next few years when I keep going through this. And that's it. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library, where the game is always a book. Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Curtis. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you guys again soon. Bye-bye. Thank you.